Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow Masterclass, where we bring you, the entrepreneur, front and center on a national platform to ask your questions directly to a panel of experts. Over the series of masterclasses, we've been focusing on different industries and, of course, focusing on the impact that COVID has had on these different industries. Today, we're bringing you part one of the impact we've seen of the pandemic as far as the supply chain ecosystem is concerned. Talking about the eye on how disruptions have been managed, bringing you some of India's biggest voices and experts on how they've done it and their advice for you. Let me introduce our panelists tonight. First up, R.S. Subramaniam, Senior Vice President and Managing Director at DHL Express. Anshuman Singh, Chairman and MD, Stellar Value Chain Solutions. Ishan Singh Bedi, CEO, Synchronized Supply Systems, member, ASSOCHAM. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. All right, with that, let's start. Ishan, my first question is to you. 2020, 2021, we were hoping that, we would perhaps see some relief, if I can call it that, relief from the tsunami of the pandemic. That hasn't been there. But professionally and for your industry, this period has been good, if I can call it that. Just give us a sense, 2020, 2021 so far, what this period has been like for you, professionally and personally.
Yeah, so my view on the industry is from a domestic logistics point of view, and that basically entails trucking and warehousing. So when 2020 started off and, we had the COVID lockdown, that was a severe lockdown and almost everything was shut down. And because there was no, lead time announced before the lockdown, everything came to a standstill. And that was quite disruptive for us because, everything stopped moving and all of the products in our warehouses, on our trucks, literally were standstill. So as the lockdown progressed, the government, softened up the stand a little bit and allowed essential services where some movement started and things started moving. But overall, because the severity of the lockdown was very high, therefore, the time to come back, into momentum for the logistics space and for the logistics industry took some time. So it was only by, the months of June and July that things actually started getting a bit better. Subsequently, we experienced an extreme phase where, there was very high logistics demand right up from, October to the month of March. And it was all the pent up consumption that was suddenly being released, and there was huge demand, because of which we had a very good 6-7 months, very high volumes. Trucking rates were pretty high, and it was a good number of months. But then again, as soon as the lockdown was announced, this time with a little less severity, over a period of time, things started slowing down again. And almost came to a standstill, but now things are moving again. So we're hoping that this time around, the lockdown, the release from the lockdown will be much quicker and things will come back to normal very, very quickly.
Are you sharing that same optimism, Anshuman?
Say, Sunanda, whether I share the optimism or not, because there are two terms which have been widely used for many, many years. But the actual meaning of those two terms is dawning on us now. There's a term called VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which has been there in existence since '87 and has been bandied about by many experts over the years. But I think for the first time in the last 1 year, we are really comprehending the meaning of that term called VUCA. And the other term, which was coined by Nicholas Nassim Taleb several years ago, is the black swan, the term called black swan. And that's a term, believe me, which has actually exposed its real true meaning only today. Black swan event is one which cannot be predicted, which hits extremely severely, and which later on, people always say that it could have been predicted, and that's a false claim. That's what a black swan event is. This COVID epidemic for the last 1 year is a complete VUCA and a black swan event. Nothing can be predicted, nothing can be planned. First 6 months were bad last year, next 6 months were good. Last 3 months have been a nightmare. So large corporates have the muscle and the resources. People like us have the money power, have the muscle power, have the bandwidth, have large teams, to have 10,000 people working for us, so large senior teams who are managing the show very well. So while we speak in conferences, we are very clear that we are doing a damn good job. But that damn good job can be done by corporates who have the bandwidth and the structure and the people and the capability to handle those costs. It has taken a heavy toll on the small players.
Yeah.
The large players have done well, but the small players have taken a heavy toll. And even us, has it been an easy ride? No way. So we run complex supply chains across the country. We run millions and millions of square feet of warehouses, including e-commerce as well as omnichannel and non-e-commerce. And we run several thousands of trucks, small, medium, large across the country. But believe me, every day is a new day and a new challenge, and nothing can be predicted. This is the first time when efficiencies is not the name of the game. In supply chain, there are two terms. One is efficiency, which is cost-based, and the other is responsiveness, which cost is secondary, but speed is more essential. In this VUCA environment, responsiveness is the name of the game.
Sure. Black swan definitely is the way to describe what is happening to us. I want to give you the chance for opening comments as well. You know, what's 2020 like for you so far?
See, I cannot disagree with what Anshuman is saying, which is that the small players, SMEs, possibly unorganized sector, or at the lowest level of the pyramid, they've been possibly affected the most. I think 2020, 2021, last 12 to 15 months is a period which is like offset statement, right? It's never before challenges everybody has faced. But it's brought forward a few things which are, in my mind, very important, especially from a logistics service provider point of view. Yeah, I think it has underlined the importance of, I think at a very base level, planning, looking a bit ahead in terms of how you construct your, from an industry business point of view. How are you planning for your variables ahead of you? How there are certain variables nobody can be fully prepared for, but there is an extent to which every business has to build certain risk processes into their planning. If you ask me, this is one aspect which has been significantly underlined.
Sure.
There are businesses who have low asset light, low commitment, and therefore easy to enter, easy to exit. Yes, some of them would have exited, but they've exited at low cost as well. And they will come back at the same pace when the economy picks up and things come back into normal. So therefore, it's quite a mixed bag. If you ask me personally, I think we've had really very, very difficult few months and very challenging months, which are very, very productive. Yeah, so it's been a big yo-yo, but I think we've done extremely well over the last 12 to 15 months.
Okay. Subbu, so, if I can ask you, the express industry, I understand, grew nearly 12 to 15%. This was during the height of the pandemic and for most of 2020. We're possibly looking at a third wave. We're still riding out the second wave. A lot of states are announcing lockdowns and extension of lockdowns. So is it possible for you, sitting where we are today, to put a figure and say that we could possibly continue growing at that figure for the industry?
See, it's interesting question. When you say express industry, I represent express industry, international express to be more specific. By nature, international express industry, the three or four or five big players, we all run a global network. It's highly asset intensive. For example, in India, we have about 3,500 employees. Almost all our shipments are handled by our own employees. And we have our own facilities, we have our own fleet. In normal time, we get into challenging competition from, like I said, asset-led, tech-led players on the ground. But when crisis of this nature comes, the commitment and the control you have on your network actually really helps you. The entire responsibility of making businesses' demands to be met, in a sense, fell on the express industry.
Our first question coming to us from Leena Pratap of Wings Travel Solutions. She's saying, you said logistics took a little bit of time to come back. This was last year. For small players like us, we're still facing challenges, particularly on pricing. Pricing has continued to be a challenge. What's your view on that?
Well, there's two thoughts there. One, within the space, within the trucking space, pricing became, even though we had, all-time high rates in terms of transportation, which we were charging our customers, the transporters were not making much money, and the logistics players were actually losing some money. And that was primarily because the price of diesel was enhanced from maybe about 60 rupees to 80 rupees over a short period of 2 months. Any business that takes a hit of about 30% on its major input cost, loses any chance of making the big bucks, right? So last year was a little tough in terms of pricing as well, because our input costs were going up, and because our output pricing is market determined. It's we are pretty much at the mercy of efficiency, of how we can efficiently run our assets, how we can sweat them, and that's primarily the reason why companies, some companies did better than others. One point that I would like to bring out is that a key learning for us and for many other players that we've spoken to has been that technology was the one aspect which really helped people come back quicker, right? And a company's ability to bounce back actually depended on the amount of technology it had deployed. So like Mr. Subramaniam said that, DHL has a great network, but along with the network, they have huge investments in technology, which allows, a company to operate when the people are not around. And that's what technology does. So even for us, the big learning has been that, technology is the way forward.
Let's slip into a short break. On that note, we're back in just a moment. Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow Masterclass. Tonight, we're talking about the supply chain ecosystem and managing disruptions due to the pandemic. Subbu, I have a question to you. You was mentioning yo-yo really when it comes to what's been taking place in the logistics and the transportation and really supply chain management. Too early to predict what's going to be the impact on the GDP because of all the lockdowns that we've seen, because manufacturing plants had to shut down for just a little bit, and therefore lesser demand really for the logistics and supply chain management, industry and ecosystem.
There is a difference between the first lockdown and the current situation which we are facing, which is that in the first lockdown, everything came to standstill and slowly picked up. But currently, we are managing the pandemic while taking care of businesses which are still running nearly to capacity. But for the last week or 10 days, I think most businesses have been operational, especially in the sectors in which we operate. I can make a comment on this because I think DHL Express has exposure to almost every sector in the economy. There is no sector for which we are not relevant. And therefore, we see a full portfolio. To some extent, that gives us great stability. Somebody or the other is growing at some time, and there are pressures on the other sectors. But we see that over a period and very fast as we come out of the second wave, you will see a recovery. I am very optimistic looking into the future.
Absolutely. Our next question, Anshuman, if you could take this on first, but it's open to our other panelists as well. Sumit, he says he's a senior manager at L&T. What cost reduction techniques are companies adopting to manage the current situation as revenues have been hit hard?
Now, this end-to-end value chain transformation or supply chain system, the success of this or a failure of this is not linked only to a supply chain player like us. It is very intricately linked to our customers, who's the corporate. And we work only for B2B. We work for only large corporates. So I can give you what has been happening in the last 1 year. So we divide our business into two parts. One is e-commerce and the other is omni-channel. Now, omni-channel covers all sectors, FMCG, lifestyle, pharma. The question that has been asked is as to what do we do on the cost reduction side. believe me, there's no one standard answer. We have more than 10,000 people across the country. Every sector is responding differently.
Yeah.
And not only is every sector responding differently, at different points of time, they're responding differently because this is such an uncertain environment. What are we doing to reduce the cost? Believe me, in this uncertain environment, in the COVID era, we are increasing costs. The cost reduction is not happening. For example, each of our fulfillment centers or distribution centers have 500, 600 employees each.
Yeah.
If you want to run the show, it's mandatory to do an RT-PCR test for everyone every 15 days. It's mandatory to do sanitization. It's mandatory to do temperature checking. It's mandatory to do medical care for all of them. All this is increasing cost by 15 to 20%. Forget reduction. You can't handle uncertainty and reduce costs at the same time.
Sure.
For companies which are growing, costs are being added to enable the growth. For companies which are degrowing, costs are being lowered by various ways. By reducing inventory, by reducing space, by reducing people, by reducing manpower, etc. But there's no one size fits all, and we are catering to all the sectors and collaborating with each customer differently and doing what is good for their business, because this one answer does not fit all.
Sure. I want to give Ishan the chance to respond before taking our next set of questions. Go ahead, Ishan.
Yeah. So I totally agree with Anshuman on the short-term implications on the cost because of the current conditions. But on a broader and a longer-term view, I think what the lockdown and what all of this has shown us, that we can operate with lesser number of people at a similar level of efficiency if we have a technology play in place. And the perspective that brings out is that our focus should get moved from reducing cost, for the sake of cost, and should actually be on increasing productivity.
Subbu, did you want to add something?
Yeah, see, there are one set of costs which are unavoidable. Airline costs have gone up, petroleum-related costs have gone up, fuel, Anshuman mentioned about fuel, and packing material costs have gone up, again, petroleum-linked. Rupee versus forex, there is a devaluation, and therefore there's a natural tendency for cost. There are a variety of costs which is unavoidable. But I think there are many aspects where in this period, what you are doing is going to help you in the long run, which is that I think in the last 1 year, I think we've possibly gained 5 years in terms of our digitalization journey. Yeah. In another conversation I was telling you, which is that we now have nearly no paper in our transactions. 100% of our payments are digital. We've now put in place a contactless delivery so that we can bring efficiencies at the time of delivery. Paperless trade, we are now pushing so that customs clearance can be paperless, and therefore there is absolutely no physical transaction.
Yeah.
We've implemented a series of platforms for our customers in the interfaces which are getting automated. Where is it helping? It's helping us now because unlike the last lockdown, this lockdown, I told you that we are running our show with nearly full volume. But I need to maintain contact tracing and social distancing norms and sanitization norms, and therefore my rostering is very, very different. I have nearly 40-50% hands, but 80-90% or 100% of the volume to be handled. But this is a new, this is a discovery and an efficiency which we have found during the COVID. And going forward, what will it help? It will help us to do more with the same. Yeah, I think the efficiency gains are coming as the economy picks up. So people who are standing and fighting and figuring out where is the efficiency and the meaning in deriving value in their business will gain in the long term.
Two questions coming to us on the export market and import and export. I do know Ishan looks largely at the domestic side of the business, but I'd like to pose this to the panel. The first one is coming to us from Murli Jha. He says he's co-founder, director, CEO at ATI Electronics. My question is, what would be the way forward given import and export, and how that's really going to be impacted? Our second question coming to us from Ramesh Balasundram of Hub and Spoke Associates. He says the conversation so far is centered around domestic and what's really happening in the domestic scenario. How about small businesses like us, which are looking at import and export? Subbu, would you like to take this first?
Yeah, see, from an export point of view, I think the from what I see in our volumes and the pattern in which things are flowing, barring a few sectors, I think it is largely positive in the last 6-8 months. There might be a minor pause button for a week or two in May, but again in June, things will improve. It's visible in some of the indicators. Purchase managers index is still above 50 and positive, which means there is pipeline of orders, and there the outlook will continue to remain positive. The second point, which we should not forget, is that we still have a crisis situation, but several countries and some of the most important catchment markets for Indian exports have all opened up, and they are on their way to recovery, and that's what should be looked at when an exporter from India is looking into the lane. So I think for exports, the outlook is positive, is my view.
Anshuman, anything that you want to add?
Import and export are having an impact on two counts. One is the COVID count, and the other is the geopolitical count, because of which countries bordering India, there are certain restrictions which have been imposed for various other reasons.
Sure.
So that is slowly sorting it out. So we have seen a lot of fluctuation in imports. We do a lot of import warehousing too. And we have had period when there was a complete lull. Then we have had a period when there was a complete glut. And right now it's a mixed bag in terms of import. So to actually forecast a way ahead, I think it's a few months for us to still realize where the direction is going to be in terms of imports, because there is a lot of PLI being given to various sectors for manufacturing in India.
Yeah.
So how will that impact imports? A lot of parts will still continue to be imported. So there are a lot of things happening on the geopolitical front, on the policy front, as well as on the COVID front.
All right, that's all we could manage to put into this part one of our masterclass, focusing on the disruptions on supply chain and really managing that, and what you, the entrepreneur, should be learning from some of India's biggest experts when it comes to the value chain ecosystem. Part two is going to come up. Do stay tuned for that. For tonight, though, it's a wrap. Stay home, stay safe. Do you think that the biggest challenge for small businesses based in Tier 3 and Tier 4 is just adopting the existing technology, or do you feel there are other challenges that need to be addressed?
Technology is readily available. It's the execution of the technology that is the key aspect, which I think is lacking sometimes in our country, where we don't, execute the technology to the level where it brings out the efficiency that it's supposed to deliver.
Welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow Masterclass, a digital-first platform where we bring entrepreneurs like yourself face-to-face with some of India's biggest experts, talking about different industries and talking about the impact that COVID has had on these different industries and bringing you their perspectives. Today, we're continuing to put the focus on the supply chain ecosystem and how some of India's biggest players have managed to really keep those disruptions in its place. Let me quickly introduce our panelists as we're bringing you highlights of part two of that master. First up, R.S. Subramaniam, Senior Vice President and Managing Director at DHL Express. Anshuman Singh, Chairman and MD, Stellar Value Chain Solutions. Ishan Singh Bedi, CEO, Synchronized Supply Systems, member, ASSOCHAM. 2020 and 2021 so far, what this period has been like for you professionally and personally.
We're hoping that this time around, the lockdown, the release from the lockdown will be much quicker and things will come back to normal very, very quickly.
Black swan event is one which cannot be predicted, which hits extremely severely, and which later on people always say that it could have been predicted, and that's a false claim. That's what a black swan event is. This COVID epidemic for the last 1 year is a complete VUCA and a black swan event.
I think it has underlined the importance of I think at a very base level, planning, looking a bit ahead in terms of how you construct your, from an industry business point of view, how are you planning for your variables ahead of you? How
next question coming to us from Anju Prasad of Prasad Travel Associates Limited. She says she's the CEO and co-founder. The panel is talking about technology and the increased use of technology, really coming into play due to the pandemic, Internet of Things, blockchain, 3D printing, autonomous transportation, etc. I agree, gaining renewed interest, but picture very different in small town India. What does the panel have to say about this? Open to all three of you. Ishan, if you want to take this first, and then I could come to
Sure.
Anshuman.
So, a key aspect that I want to bring out is that there has been technology availability even before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So we are now on a Zoom call, and a Zoom call was available before the pandemic. However, nobody really used it, right? And it was not considered, maybe formal enough or professional enough. But now, the pandemic has changed the whole mindset. So the point that I want to bring forward is that, technology has always been available. Unfortunately, it's the execution of the technology that has always been in doubt, right? So we have a lot of technology within the businesses that we run. In the travel space, I'm sure there's enough technology available as well. But in logistics, I know for a fact that there's so much technology. For example, barcodes were invented in 1950, right? And we are 70 years down the line. And within India, barcodes are not predominantly used throughout the supply chain unless it's a captive supply chain or an e-commerce supply chain. In most industries, they are used at the point of sale, but that's predominantly the only place they are used. So technology is readily available. It's the execution of the technology that is the key aspect, which is, which I think is lacking sometimes in our country, where we don't execute the technology to the level where it brings out the efficiency that it's supposed to deliver.
Anshuman, do you think that the biggest challenge for small businesses based in tier 3 and tier 4 is just adopting the existing technology, or do you feel there are other challenges that need to be addressed?
Multiple challenges. Since the person who's asked the question is from the travel industry, there are use of technology. What Ishan said, for example, the use of video conferencing. I'll club this with an earlier question of reducing costs. Technology has helped to reduce travel costs. Now that is counterproductive to all travel agencies and travel companies. But it has definitely helped reduce travel costs for all companies. For example, a company like us, which is a supply chain company, we were very hands-on people. We would rush to any fulfillment center to start a new project, to start a new operation, or to do anything. Today, we are doing virtual tours of all our warehouses. We are taking virtual tours of our customers of all our warehouses through the virtual network, through such platforms. So travel costs have come down. Even meetings with customers, earlier people used to crisscross the country, traveling in airlines, morning, night, morning flight, evening flights, finishing of 2 meetings in a day, meeting customers. All that today has gone. Today people meet on video conferencing calls through various platforms, and very quickly so. Earlier, when we used to travel from Mumbai to Bangalore, we were able to do maximum of 2 meetings in a day because Bangalore, the travel is so difficult. Today, if we have to have meetings with people in Bangalore, we are able to do 6 or 7 or maybe 8 meetings in a day.
Sure.
Now that's an increase in productivity. That is a reduction in travel costs. That is a reduction in so many other costs. And there's so much productivity increase. So that finally improves supply chain costs. But the counter effect is that the travel industry, the hotel industry is definitely taking a hit on this. So somebody's gain is somebody's loss. So that's the changing economics in this world. In terms of usage of technology, necessity is the mother of invention. So a lot of people who were not using technology earlier had to jump onto this bandwagon. Tier 3, Tier 4 smaller companies are still lagging behind and are suffering because the urban centers caught on first, the large corporates caught on first, the smaller companies are struggling, but they are catching on fast. For example, this platform is not democratized. The interaction platform, the video conferencing platforms, basic technologies to control factors are very, very democratic. No Tier 3 or Tier 4 has any negative impact on they have no negative on this. They're equal gainers on this. But in terms of technology, will take longer to implement. Supply chain technologies, integration technologies, transaction systems, if they have not been in place, pandemic periods have not been the best time to implement technology for smaller companies. Large companies have done it. Smaller companies have still in tier 3, tier 4 towns have struggled to implement new age technologies, but they are catching on quite fast because these platforms, the interaction platforms, are helping them to catch up quite fast.
Okay.
I think, Sunanda, on technology, the point to remember is that usually, if you are on a lower level of technology, you have what is called as the last mover advantage because technology is fast changing. In that sense, technology actually gives a lot of entry to people into industries where there are well-entrenched players. Yeah, it's 10 times more difficult for DHL to implement a new technology across their network compared to a startup who can implement a platform and therefore find an entry through technology. The second point I want to make is that at any given point in time, across the spectrum, different players in different countries, different geographies are in different stages of evolution. Yeah, therefore, there is a range of technologies which are useful. From wherever you are, there is always an incremental up for you, which is relevant for you, which will give you efficiency and which will step up your play. And that is what one should look at. So therefore, technology of different orders, we see, for example, we have 220 country network. Not all countries are in the same level of technology evolution. But then you have a basic platform and therefore you have to pull along a bit. Yes.
Interesting and important questions coming in. The first one is coming to Anshuman from Umesh Agarwal. He says his question is on the demand for cold chain requirement. There's been a spike. What challenges did you perhaps face? How did you manage them? What advice can you share?
So cold chain is one sector which I have been investing in for the last 10 years, but it is the slowest growing sector. India is still a country where a large population still thinks that frozen or cold is stale. Instead of, unlike the whole world, which thinks that if you have kept things frozen, you are maintaining the hygiene of the product and you're maintaining the nutrition value of the product. So Indian mindset is very, very different, and that's why the cold chain growth has been slow. Even in this pandemic period, the cold chain growth has been consistent. It has neither slowed down nor dramatically increased. In fact, a lot of noise was made on the vaccination drive that a lot of cold chain will be required. People actually forgot that on one pallet, 70,000 vaccines can come in one truck, lakhs and lakhs of vaccines can come in. So vaccination never required a very large cold chain requirement. So I had also designed a play and I thought of investing in trucks, and then I realized that my current trucks will be able to handle the current load. So cold chain is a slow growth area. One should not jump into cold chain with a massive capex investment. The returns are slow. For example, the cold chain warehousing is a serious heavy capex investment area, and the returns come in slow. And one should not jump into it because it can be cyclical. And if you're creating that capex through debt, it can weigh heavy on you. And in case the business goes down for even for a small period, you can have a very, very tough time because it's such a heavy capex. Even on the transportation of cold chain is one area where you largely have to buy trucks. All other transportation in India can be done through market hire, through leasing, through dedicated trucks from other vendors. But in cold chain, to be successful, to have a complete control on the chain, to maintain the temperatures, to maintain the sanctity of the cold chain, normally cold chain players have to buy the trucks and keep the asset on their base. So again, it is a very heavy capex area. One should only move gradually. And I'm telling you from my 10 years experience, I've acquired 3 cold chain companies in the last 10 years. Go cautiously, gradually, do not go all out. In this country, cold chain will keep on growing, but at a slow and steady pace.
Let's slip into a short break. On that note, we're back in just a moment. Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow Masterclass. Tonight, we're talking about the supply chain ecosystem and managing disruptions due to the pandemic. I want to open this next question up to Subbu and to Ishan. Vikas Bhaskar, he says he's the VP of Supply Chain Engineering at Stellar Value Chain. He says, my question is how supply chain risk managers need to assess their resilience against future shocks and adapt their strategies for a post-pandemic world. What is the new normal going to look like as far as supply chain is concerned?
The key takeaway for us in supply chain resilience has been that from a company that's manufacturing, is that to ensure continuity of supply, they need to take maybe 2 or 3 steps to ensure that they can get their products to their customers in time. The first is that over through globalization, we've come to a situation where supply chains have become pretty complicated. You're getting some parts from Finland, you're getting some parts from Germany, you're getting something from China, and there's a lot of things coming from China, and there's geopolitical issues which are coming up. So one of the simplest ways to build resilience in the supply chain is to go local. This perspective has been recognized by the government now, and the government has now come out and offered PLI incentives for manufacturing to be shifted into our country. But going local or localization is a key aspect to ensure continuity and resilience of one's supply chain. The other aspect that's key for resilience of supply chain, again, I believe, is technology. Right? I hate to repeat it again and again, but through technology, one of the aspects that which is often ignored is that a supply chain is a link of many participants in a chain, right? And unfortunately, in India, we have an environment where data sharing between chain, links of the supply chain is not looked, is frowned upon. So the perspective of not sharing data with the partners that you work with is quite peculiar to me. And to me, that seems that, if we don't share data and if we don't make the supply chain exactly one, we will always have issues in terms of resilience, in terms of, products not reaching their destinations in time. And going forward, as data information and information sharing between supply chain partners increases, supply chains will become stronger and more resilient. So that's the perspective that we, look at for the future right now for resilience in supply chain.
See, I want to draw a slightly larger canvas on resilience per se, and that's something which is borne out in the last year and a half from where we stand and what we see, which is that today resilience, if you want for your business, it has to be built into every aspect of your business. Yeah, it's not just about the technology or the warehouse you run or I think every aspect of it. What do I mean by that? The people you employ. What is your employment strategy? Yeah, the kind of network you are and the assets you build, and what is your therefore infrastructure and what is the technology you are employing? Every aspect of it will eventually add to the resilience which your business is having. So let's take the people, for instance. If your business model is built on being light on people, which is all outsourced, and then there is a flexibility which you're looking for. It works in a particular point in time, it doesn't work at the other point in time. And therefore, it will become a source of risk for you. So in every aspect of business, the way you train your people, the way you build your team and the skill sets in your team. So there are commitments needed for you to build the resilience which is needed. It is the same thing which you need to carry into even the partners with whom you are working with. What nature of partners are you working with? Are you taking vehicles off the market? Are you living by the day in terms of the network with which you are working? Because you are getting a set of cost benefits by operating that way, but that can build into a risk when the situation outside is a disaster situation or a pandemic kind of a situation. Therefore, the resilience for the business, the nature of the resilience which you want to build for the business needs to be built in every single aspect of your the way you are doing your business. If you find that your resilience levels are low, it's a call you are taking. It is an acceptable business risk for you, and which is why you're operating with that plan, with that frame of your business strategy. So there are no single solution for anybody. It is horses for the courses.
Two questions coming to us on e-commerce. In the interest of time, Anshuman, I would like to pose this first question only to you on e-commerce. Dipan Sen, he says he's owner at Apical Job Insurance Private Limited. Given the current situation, customer behavior shifting towards the online world, how would you foresee unit economics for logistics providers?
We as a country have been very good at catch up. We have never planned in advance. This pandemic is actually forcing everyone to plan in advance. This is the first time we are realizing that doing things after things have gone wrong, only focused on cost may not always work. technology, infrastructure, training, people, talent, all has to be built in advance. Now, e-commerce is a sector where the online behavior changed suddenly because of this pandemic. So this pandemic actually was a big boon for e-commerce growth, similar to digitization growth. Now, e-commerce is a digitized commerce, so that obviously grew and will continue to grow. So the share of percentage of the total market that was envisaged for e-commerce in 2028 is now being advanced to 2025 in the overall scenario, and saying that the e-commerce growth will be propelled because of this pandemic. That is an activity where there's a collaborative working going on between the e-commerce players and supply chain players like us, because it has to be collaborative. While they are building their own capacity for some part of it, it is being realized by more and more companies that outsourcing is the way to go, because in a pandemic kind of a situation, in an uncertain world, there's enough and more to be done by the corporates themselves in terms of the category handling, in terms of the vendor handling, product handling, manufacturing, sourcing, etc. Supply chain is something that can be outsourced. So outsourcing is increasing in this uncertain world. This has led to more and more outsourcing. In fact, e-commerce companies, all the large and the medium ones, have started more and more outsourcing in the last 1 year. And we are collaborative working, and that is one of the reasons for our growth has been e-commerce. And this year, our biggest growth will be out of e-commerce, because outsourcing has increased, e-commerce as a sector has increased. So e-groceries is a new sector which is growing rapidly. E-groceries. So groceries as a sector on e-commerce was not prevalent earlier. Last 1 year has given a big fillip to it. Now, related to e-groceries, there are hubs and sort centers which are related to it, and last mile hubs for deliveries. So that is increasing. Last mile transportation is increasing because of groceries. All other categories online were anyway prevalent, but because of the pandemic, consumption has increased dramatically.
Sure.
And this will continue to increase even in the future. And so technology and e-commerce without a technological background, with solid infra, with ahead of time invest. So all our growth has been happening because we have been building warehouses 5 lakh square feet once, much ahead of time. We did not wait for any customer. We built millions and millions of square feet in advance, and building infra in advance is the only way to counter such uncertainties and help corporates and help e-commerce companies as well as omni-channel companies to grow and manage their supply chains.
Okay, Ishan, if you could very briefly answer this next question. A part of the answer has already been given by Anshuman. Akash Kumar Jaiswal, he says he's deputy manager at Stella Value Chain. I'm going to paraphrase this question. Essentially, he's asking about investments in logistics and warehousing, given this huge shift towards, online shopping because of the pandemic.
So there is, there's always two ways of operating. There's one, the push system, and then there's one, the pull system, right? So it depends on the total methodology of the company. Our understanding is that, warehousing infrastructure creation is not a core competence for us. And we always find that there is infrastructure that is available, and therefore we go out and lease it. So warehousing infrastructure investments in terms of land and building is something that, we do not participate in as a company policy, but investments within the warehouse of, mechanized equipment and, for example, all the equipment that's required inside for automation as well. That's, of course, a big part of our investments, and then we continue to do that.
Sure. Subbu, to you, in the interest of time, just the top 1 or 2 things, if you could tell us. You've recently come out with a white paper as far as the the logistics industry is concerned. Just the top 1 or 2 things that you would like to summarize as far as what's happening on the domestic scenario.
White paper, what we've released this week, it's called Revisiting the Pandemic Resilience. Last year, we released a white paper, which is about the global pandemic in front of us and how the vaccine and the related COVID relief supply chain will play out. So this is after a year of experience in how things have played out. The white paper talks about what are the learnings from that, what has gone well, where we need to do a catch-up, and how is the outlook going forward in a world where possibly vaccination is going to be the single biggest catch-up which everybody has to do so that you can come out of the pandemic challenge. I think the paper has some very interesting points. At this point in time, looking at the last 3-4 weeks experience in India, possibly we have a very, I will not say negative, but a sort of a difficult, challenging outlook. But I think globally, when you take stock of how things have happened, the paper talks about end-to-end, what has been the development. Some of the statistics and the factors which are explained in terms of vaccine development, how the vaccine production globally has been ramped up, what is the vaccination effort which has happened so far in the last 3, 4, 5 months of vaccination globally, how have the logistics companies caught up in terms of supporting the distribution, where while vaccination is on one side, there is other need for you to fight the pandemic when people are infected, and therefore there are related supply chains which are running. How has been the effort there, and therefore what is the challenge going forward, and what are the few things which not just companies but countries have to do, and what has worked and what is it that we can do going forward. I think it's an excellent oversight. 100% of it may not be fully applicable to everybody, but I don't think the principles go away. It's a matter of time before we will catch up in the country with this. Few weeks down the line, like I said, our outlook will be very different.
All right, that's all we could manage to pack into this second part of a focus really as far as managing supply chain disruptions is concerned. For everyone who's watching tonight, thank you so much for watching. Stay home, stay safe.